and welcome. Alan Plum here again with a little more from Shed Engineering. And first and foremost, a big thank you to everyone for their interest and comments on my last video, an alternative to plaster cloth. And I'm going to do another demonstration just to make sure that the last one wasn't a fluke, because I was quite impressed how well it worked. And again, any comments are appreciated. I don't want to mislead anyone and be biased just because it's me doing it. So the more comments and views, the better. Now, I didn't actually show the cloth. It's quite stretchy material, and you can probably see there, you can actually see through it, and I think one of the reasons that it works quite well is because of the shrink wrap. When I've watched videos, you get lines, straight lines on the plaster cloth, and I think that's because the newspaper underneath is being creased in straight lines. It automatically creases in straight lines, and so you get these angular bits underneath, whereas the industrial shrink wrap, not only is it sticky, so it sticks to itself, making it a lot more stable. It doesn't crease in those straight lines, and so when you put the if you was using the little narrow strips of proprietary plaster cloth and you're dabbing it down over newspaper, then it's taking on those creases and those are showing through. I think with the shrink wrap, you're getting a much smoother packing material underneath to start with, and then because you're using bigger pieces of cloth, if you've got a void like that, or a crevice or a crack or anything like that in your packing material, because you're using a much bigger piece of cloth, it's spanning that void, and so rather than getting a crease, the cloth is spanning that void and you're getting much smoother contours, and I think that's why it's working so well. I wanted to try and do something a little bit different. I enjoy trying to come up with different approaches, and let's face it, if we all copied each other and did what somebody else has always done, then we'd still be living in caves, because one bloke had copied the bloke before, and so on and so on, and so we'd still be living in caves. But I enjoy trying to come up with something. To come up with something new is a bit difficult, but most branch lines that you see on layouts normally end up going to a little station or a halt. Now, back in the day, there were hundreds of companies who had their own sidings, and so you'd get anything from, like, I don't know, I forget its name, a British tin box company or something like that in Wisbech, where I mean, they make biscuit tins of all descriptions, ordinary food tins, but the steel had come in obviously by rail, and all the tin cans would also go out. You used to get little family run coal mines that might only have a dozen people working for them. You used to get little narrow gauge railways in woodland areas for forestry. Then obviously you had the narrow gauge lines in quarries and mines, etc. Now I'm thinking about a place up in Derbyshire, the Ecclesbourne line, and at the end of the line you've got a place called Wirksworth. That's W-I-R, Wirksworth. It was a bit strange because this main line that somebody was building was going up a dead-ended valley, and well, to get out of it and continue up towards Manchester, they'd have had to dig something like a 4 or 5 mile flipping tunnel. But luckily there was several quarries in the hills around there, and each of them had a narrow gauge railway, and they more or less all joined up, and there were this spider of little narrow gauge lines coming down to the railhead at Wirksworth, where the line come up. There were just 2 sidings, and you had like a loading stage alongside the main line or the standard gauge line, where the narrow gauge trucks, the ones that are sort of got a V body and swing and tip over, they would come down with the ore, tip into the standard gauge wagons, and then obviously taken away for processing. So I thought that would be a little bit different. I'm going to try and do that, and the reason I'm experimenting is because that I've just said the cloth intends to span across crevices. I wondered whether you could actually push it into crevices to create some kind of rock strata effect, and again just to see that the last one wasn't a complete fluke. And also I wanted to use the cheap household plaster. Well, not cheap because I'm way out of date with my prices. I think, I don't know what I said, £4 or £5. It's more like £7 or £8 for the big bags. But I also wanted to use that. Now obviously in America, Australia, I don't know what kind of products you've got out there, and I mean there's difference in temperatures from Canada being I don't know, 20 or 30 degrees below zero to somewhere in Australia that's, you know, 95 or 100 degrees. So as far as drying times and the products you've got, then you know you're going to have to experiment yourself to see what's what. I had got some plaster of Paris, but I was worried about that drying too fast, and I added half household filler. So we'll crack on with this demonstration and see what we can come up with. So if you stick with me, I'll rip all this down, and we'll get on with something else. Now this had only been down about a day and a half and was still quite damp, so it came up pretty easy. But it does demonstrate that it only took a few hours to create and wasn't vastly expensive. So if this is your first attempt and you're not happy with it, don't think that it's the end of the world. You can soon remodel it in a couple of hours. There's going to be a little branch line coming in from the left, splitting into 2 sidings perhaps, which would be here, and I'm thinking that's done in 00, and then I'm going to try and create a more rocky kind of landscape, and try and do something along the lines of a quarry or a little mine. And so this is all going to be N gauge and representing a little line going up into a quarry and another line going down into a tunnel, as if they're doing some mining. So I'm just breaking off pieces of building foam randomly and gluing them in position. Now you can often find building foam on building sites, and also scrap foam at builders merchants, because when they have a delivery they have strips of foam under the consignment so they can get the forklift under the load. Now obviously you can also use anything to hand, but you're not looking for immense strength.
If it's strong enough for a bumblebee to make a hard landing on, then I reckon it's about strong enough. Because the plaster cloth should end up with folds and grooves and ridges, and that becomes like a random corrugation, and will have much more inherent strength than a flat convex hillside. So that's taken under an hour. You can see that it's very random. There's hollows and cracks to try and create crevices in the rock. It's completely hollow, and the back is just supported basically on stilts of building foam. Then we use the shrink wrap to create the grassy areas of the hillside where there's going to be much softer contours. Now when it's freshly laid like this, it does intend to spring up a little bit, but I'm hoping once the plaster cloth is laid over it, then it should bed down and be perfectly alright.
Right, it's just coming up to 8 o'clock. I put a squirt of brown paint in to start off with. I don't really know how much to mix, because that's quite a big area. And I got one of the smaller bags of household finished plaster. That's the fine. I wasn't spending money on anything expensive.
Now for standard, basic, simple stuff like this, the cheapest kids' poster paints are fine. Don't get drawn into thinking you need to buy special paints. I get really annoyed, honestly I do, with big companies. They take a cheap product, put it in ever tinier containers, put a load of fancy packaging around it. They give it some fancy name, I don't know, realistic earth pigments, and charge totally outrageous prices for tinier and tinier amounts. It's a total swizz. It's a total rip-off. Have you seen Cherry Bakewells lately? Supposedly exceedingly good cakes. They are getting smaller and smaller. It's another rip-off. More like exceedingly small cakes. Why don't they just make them like Rolos? Make them even smaller, just like Rolos. Then they could stack them on top of each other and save all that flipping packaging. The world is just full of cons and rip-offs. Just like the banking system. That's the biggest, most deceitful rip-off in history. And everyone gets conned and enslaved by banks controlling flipping currencies. And we just accept it. We just accept it like lambs to the slaughter. Because we can't be bothered. We just can't be bothered to look back in history and learn the truth. But the founding fathers or colonialists, you know what I mean. The founding fathers or colonialists, whatever you call them, they didn't need currencies. They just printed paper money. It was called colonial script, I think, and it was simply accepted as legal tender. It wasn't backed by gold or anything. And it worked fine for years and years and years until the Bank of England finally wormed its way in there and ruined everything. You just look back in history. There were 4 or 5 men, leaders or presidents, who tried their absolute utmost to stop a central bank or federal bank being formed, because they knew, they were wise men, they knew what was going to happen. They were just trying to stand up for the ordinary man and stop him from being ripped off. You just look back at history and look at what happened to Abraham Lincoln. He wanted some money for the war effort, and so he went off to the bank and do you know what they said? Oh yes, of course you can have some money. It'll be between 26 and 28% interest. Between 26 and 28% interest. He said, thank you very much, but no thank you. I will not enslave the entire population of America, its children and its grandchildren into paying taxes to repay such interest. So he had a word with his underman, said what we're going to do, and he said, well, just print your own money. Can we do that? Yeah, as long as it's accepted as legal tender, and that's what he did. And he didn't have a penny to pay in interest. It was accepted as legal tender, and that's how the American greenback dollar came into being. All he'd got to pay for was the paper and ink, and he didn't have a penny, not a single penny, to pay in interest. And you'll just remember those profound words: I will not enslave the entire population of the USA and its children and its grandchildren into paying taxes to repay interest. And the banks just enslave everyone into debt. Even if you haven't got one penny of personal borrowing, you still end up getting enslaved because the government is paying massive sums in interest. They've got massive debts, and so you've got to get taxed. Everyone gets taxed one way or another so the government can pay that debt back. It's the founding fathers that had the right idea, and the others, President Lincoln and the other presidents. They tried their absolute utmost because they could see what would happen, and they were trying their best for the working man. And you take a look back at history and see what happened to them. Well, they all got shot, every single one of them. But just think if the government could fund the infrastructure and projects without incurring any massive debts in interest, it would stop the biggest rip-off of all time. Sadly, I can do very little about the banking system. It takes an entire nation to stand up and make its voice heard and act as one before a monumental change can be made. But by golly, there's no way I'm going to buy tiny little tins of paint with fancy flipping names and get ripped off on something as simple as that, when household emulsion paint or kiddies paints is perfectly adequate for most simple stuff like I'm doing. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a bad day. The machine crashed when we had a power cut, and I lost about 3-4 hours of editing and voiceovers, so I'm not a happy chappy at the moment. But anyway, as you saw, we got the piece of cloth soaked. That did take a little bit longer than I thought. That probably took 4 or 5 minutes to get it properly coated. I'm wondering whether I can claim a world record for the biggest piece of plaster cloth ever applied. That bloody intercom. Yes, have I seen your long skirt? What, the one with the little red roses round the hem and the embroidery on the pocket? No, 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 no. No, not seen that anywhere. Sorry. And I tell you what, even Dixon and Doc Green, Inspector Barlow, Kojak, even Gibson Abbey off NCIS won't even find it. Now, I did get a comment on my last demonstration that got me a little bit worried, and perhaps I should say, children, please do not try this at home or do any experiments without your parents' supervision. I can just see little Johnny soaking his sister's jumper in plaster of Paris. Johnny, you naughty boy, go and ask your daddy to get here straight away and bring a hammer and chisel. I don't know. Well, that's taken about 2 hours. I must admit, as I suspected, the cloth tries to span across any of the hollows, cracks and voids, and it didn't want to stick to the foam. If I was actually doing it again, I would brush plaster over the foam first to help it stick. As you press it down into place, then it was trying to spring back. But once it started to dry, then it became a lot easier, and you could press it into place, and it would stay put. In some places, I did get some folds and perhaps some cuts in places would help the cloth to lay down a lot easier. I had wondered whether you could actually do some of the scenery before laying the track to get the basic bones of things, because in my last demonstration the cloth smoothed down very nicely on flat areas, but with this plaster you seem to get a much thicker coating of plaster on the cloth and you can't actually smooth it down. So to me, I think the best option would be to mask off the track and go across the whole area like you've seen me do here. That saves trying to cut any small strips and apply them to along the edge of embankments, etc. And then once dry, it can be seems pretty easy to be able to cut away the unwanted cloth to reveal the track. But obviously you have to do your own experiments and decide for yourself, because every situation is going to be different. So then we give it a good scraping down with a palette knife just to get the lumps and bumps off, and then gave it a coat of black paint. Now, I don't profess to be any good at painting or weathering, etc. I buy the cheapest poster paints. I promise you, on wet plaster this will be soaking in and it will never come off, I promise you. I knew this shrink wrap had come in for something. Then, just using 3 shades of brown poster paint, I was able to mix 3 more, and I think I used some white along the way as well. If you're modelling a particular area, then you obviously use several shades that are most representative of the area or rock type that you're actually trying to model. Now, I don't feel that I can give you any advice on painting. Why? Well, plain and simple, this is the first rocky landscape I have made, and this is the first painting of a rock face I've ever done. So I can't see that there's anything here that can be classed as technical, and the result I'm getting, then there's nothing to do with years of modelling experience or painting experience or even weathering experience, and it's absolutely categorically, indisputably nothing to do with a multitude of fancy products. All I can say is put the paint on as sparingly as possible and as dry as possible. If you watch it back, you will see that I've got the sponge too wet at one point, and I dabbed a lot of the excess paint out. So don't be daunted by something like this. Don't get conned into thinking that it's technical or complicated. It's only as complicated as you want to make it. If you want to buy a compressor and an airbrush, etc., and all the paints that go with it, then fine. If you want to buy sealers and primers, then please do so. If you want to buy 50 Shades of Grey, then by all means do so. But this shows how simple it can be and what you can achieve with the very simplest products. I think all this needs toning down yet. I'm going to let it dry, see what colour it is. Now, I didn't want to get into trying to model the quarry itself, possibly with stepped walls as if they were still cutting blocks of stone. I felt the colour of freshly cut stone might be hard to capture, so as you can see I have gone for the beginner's option or way out, suggesting that the working quarry is through the narrow opening to the right, and that this area is a much older section that was opened up many years ago and is obviously quite weathered. But hopefully it'll give plenty of modelling opportunities with sheds, workshops, possibly a forge and blacksmith under the overhanging roof, along with lots of little tipper trucks, piles of pit props, possibly blocks of stone waiting to go out, and even a road coming in from the right hand side. You could also have excavators or lorries, even possibly a traction engine may look at home in such a setting. And with an 040 or 060 chassis, it gives you the opportunity to perhaps scratch build one of them quirky little shunting locos. Now okay, having this section modelled in N gauge may not be exactly to the right scale, but for the interest it gives and the element of authenticity, it may well be worth thinking about, and hopefully not too daunting, getting to this stage with 3 hours construction and just an hour's painting. Now here's a few shots. Sorry they're a bit blurred, but that might be a big bonus. These are of a huge public display. Yes, this is a public display that you have to pay to look at, and hopefully they will enthuse, motivate and fill with confidence even the most timid and apprehensive of modelers or prospective modelers. It's always good to have a comparison in styles. Now I know modelling is a very individual thing and very much down to personal taste and opinion as to what is realistic, but to emulate that style I think I need to throw away my artist's palette knife and buy myself a shovel. Here's a few stills, and hopefully you can appreciate that you're unlikely to see things this close up. Hopefully it's the more distant views that need to convey some realism, and obviously you can spend many more hours painting and adding the first signs of plants taking hold. I'm sorry this will only be of interest to people in the planning stage more or less, but I hope it demonstrates what can be done with some cloth, plaster and a few cheap poster paints, never having done anything similar to it before. And even if you allow for the masking off of the track, then you're talking about 3 hours construction and an hour's painting, and you're more or less ready for the fine detailing. I'll give a few more comments in the description, along with my email address should anyone want to ask any questions, and obviously any comments will be welcome as to whether you think this approach has got any validity and is worth trying. Thank you to all my new subscribers, that's very much appreciated, and to the old ones as well who continue to give their support, that's much appreciated. Remember, if you do subscribe and you want updates when videos are posted, remember to click the little cogwheel next to the subscribe banner. I hope you found something of interest, and as always, many thanks for watching.